The hike into the woods left Lucas drenched with sweat. The heat mixed with the humid air was the perfect mixture to make for a miserable trip. He would have normally avoided this kind of activity in the burning month of July, but this was important. This would fix his train wreck that he now called a life. As his feet pushed forward through the foliage, his mind looped the events of that night. It was a haze of snapshots and drinking that ended with him and his best friend Ben getting behind the wheel of his car. The next complete memory was waking up in the ER bed and learning Ben did not make it. After that, the disaster of his life fell together like puzzle pieces. He was charged with negligent homicide and nearly went to prison. He dropped out of college and could not hold down a job for longer than a couple of weeks. Then his girlfriend, that he was ready to marry any day now, could not find the door fast enough. He honestly could not blame her. No reason for her to go down with a sinking ship. But the woods held a secret. It was his last chance to set things right. Lucas glanced down at the leather-bound journal in his hands. This was what would bring Ben back. One night when he was walking home, after getting let go from yet another job, he found a shop that was still open. An aging woman who sold herbal remedies offered him the journal. Said she could see the despair in his eyes. Knew about the pain of bad choices that could not be easily undone. She told Lucas that the journal detailed the location of a sacred spot. One could commune with the old gods. And if the ritual was done correctly, they could be persuaded to grant a request. Even allow someone to travel back to a point in time to right a wrong. He was not sure if he would find anything at this remote place in the woods. It could be that the shopkeeper was schizophrenic, and only tales of the impossible remained in her rattled mind. Under any normal circumstance, Lucas would have never considered such an unhinged idea. However, desperation allows people to entertain even the most remote chance of redemption. Looking through the journal, Lucas could tell he was near the location. The side of the bluff to the north appeared similar to the hand drawings. According to the notes, it should be just around the bend. Small animal trails began to manifest on the forest floor, twisting around the trees. However, soon these trails began to form into one large path towards a clearing in the woods. The trees circling this area had a red hue to them, and the leaves a dark shade of orange. An odd color for the middle of July, Lucas thought. Therefore, this must be the location. Towards the back of the clearing was a large stone that had remained unmoved for ages. Moss crept up the rock, but stopped when reaching the top. The surface of the stone was smooth to the touch, as if sanded with slow, methodical purpose. Lucas set up his journal on the stone and flipped to the instructions, carefully laying out the required items. To him, the list made little sense. An offering of flowers on the altar, a pomegranate, a bell, and a large container of salt. He hoped it did not matter that it was a discount brand of salt. The journal had been specific on this part, that he must collect enough firewood for the night inside the circle, and that no matter what, the fire must not go out. If the fire went out, there would be consequences. Lucas ventured out of the circle and headed for the forest, collecting as much wood as he could find. He was not sure how much he would need to keep a fire burning all night, but he assumed it would be a large amount. The sun was quickly setting below the tree line, causing Lucas to pick up his pace. He had to have the fire lit before the sun disappeared. The sounds of the forest slowly dissipated with the light, as if they knew the veil between worlds was being breached. Satisfied with his pile of wood, Lucas grabbed the container of salt and formed a circle around the clearing, emptying the entire supply. As the last of the day's light faded from the forest, he grabbed a container of lighter fluid from his pack and sprayed a small bundle of wood. Lighting a match and throwing it on the fuel-soaked wood instantly created an inferno in the clearing. The roaring flames died down as the lighter fluid burned away, leaving a humble campfire in the center of the summoning circle. With nothing else left to do, Lucas sat beside the fire and waited. According to the journal, one of two things would happen. If the ritual was done incorrectly, or his offering unsatisfying, then nothing would happen. However, if the ritual was done correctly, and the offer enticing, then he would be visited by one of the old spirits that once commonly communed with early humankind. He had to admit that it sounded kind of far-fetched. The forest cooled as it turned to night, giving him some respite from the heat. Lucas continued to feed the wood into the fire periodically, looking around the circle for some sign or omen. Flames projected its uneven illumination around the trees, making it difficult to see any detail beyond the circle. An hour passed with nothing but the crackling sound of sticks being consumed. He let out an exhausted sigh and laid his head on his pack. Perhaps the shopkeeper was crazy, and he belonged in the nut house right along with her for believing. Lucas wanted to believe it was possible to fix things, but maybe there really is no balm in Gilead. The moment Lucas shut his eyes, a voice spoke from the woods, a whisper that was both soft and powerful.
Your offering is welcome, yet over time, these gifts have become solemn,
said the voice. He bolted upright, his breathing and heart rate suddenly quick and uncontrollable. Who's there? Lucas shouted. You invite me, yet ask who I am. Did your ancestors teach you nothing? Once, long ago, your kind would pay me tribute in exchange for a successful season. Villages and tribes would perish or thrive upon my blessing. Lucas stood up, his eyes focusing on the tree line, looking for the source of the voice. Only shadows that danced to the rhythm of the campfire met his gaze. Did the ritual actually work? He had prepared himself for failure, but never planned on what to do if it worked. No turning back now, Lucas thought to himself. I was told you can give people a second chance, the ability to go back and change things. Ah, the guilty soul wishes to undo stories already told. A path untaken I can restore, therefore I offer you this accord. Stay within the circle until morning's first light, and I will resolve your past plight. However, if you leave the sacred ground, by my covenant you will be bound. In the darkness you will take part in my harvest. Do you agree to this decree? Lucas stood silent for a moment. Something about it felt off. He did not fully understand the voice's words. Bound by a covenant and harvest in the darkness seemed like vague descriptions. However, all he had to do was remain in the circle until morning. If he was not ready to take the risk, then why did he even bother coming here? I agree, responded Lucas. Then let the trial begin, and be warned that others may come before the night is at its end. Scanning the trees, Lucas became aware of the fact he was not alone. It was not just the illumination from the campfire that caused the shadows to shift. Distorted beings moved outside the circle, testing the perimeter but darting back when they got too near the revealing fire. They had a faint resemblance to people, but they lacked any defining characteristics. Grabbing his cell phone out of his pocket, he turned on the flashlight. The LED on the front of his phone made the creatures retreat a bit further back. However, he did manage to get a clearer look at one of the beings that now stalked him. The color drained from Lucas as he came to the realization they did not have faces. Pulling away from the paralyzing revelation, he turned towards the woodpile and threw on a few more sticks. Now he understood the warning in the journal. The fire was not part of the ritual. It was to keep away the things that are drawn to the ritual. He was not sure how many of those creatures are out in the woods, but it sounded like a lot. Even if he wanted to leave the circle, it was impossible now. However, the plan was still the same as it was before. Stay until morning, keep the fire lit, don't go outside the circle. All he had to do was wait. Lucas stood near the campfire. The heat on his face was uncomfortable, but he did not dare move away from it. He tried to relax, find some kind of harmony in the situation, but it was not possible. He was constantly on edge, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever movement he saw out of the corner of his eye. This caused the time to go by slowly, like a sink that had been left to drip. The only sign that time was in fact passing was his diminishing pile of firewood that kept feeding the hungry flames. The constant state of panic left him feeling drained and unable to focus on anything else. Human beings are simply not made to be in a prolonged state of stress. Finally managing to look away from the tree line, Lucas looked down at his phone. It was 2:38 a.m. He could not be certain, but he believed sunrise was around 6 a.m. It was near, but he could not let his guard down until morning.
What a lovely night. Almost as nice as the night we parted ways,
called a familiar voice from the tree line. Lucas knew the voice, but he could not place it. Something about the tone brought him back to his childhood. A mangled figure emerged from the trees and into the circle with Lucas. He had multiple lacerations from going through the windshield and walked on a broken ankle, but a characteristic half smile was painted on his face that was unmistakable. It was Ben who approached him now. How are you here?
Thought I'd come and talk to you about your choices, about your bargaining.
I'm gonna make it right, Ben. I promise you I'm gonna make it right, said Lucas as he backed away from him.
The damage is already done, but you can still make it right.
How do I fix it?
You deserved to die that night. You talked me into riding with you. Said that you were good, that you drove even better drunk. Remember that, Lucas?
Said Ben, his jaw hanging loosely from his face. Lucas nodded as tears rolled down his red cheeks.
All you gotta do to even the score is walk out of the circle and join me.
What? Responded Lucas.
Come with me, Lucas. I can show you the dark places you can't see while you're alive.
Pointing to the eye sockets that no longer held eyes. What happened to your eyes, Ben? Where did your eyes go?
Oh, we don't need eyes where we're going, Lucas.
Ben abruptly lunged forward, wrapping his hands around Lucas's arms. Lucas fell backwards, trying to push away the attacker. He closed his eyes to avoid looking into those empty sockets as Ben's face pressed closer to his. Letting out a howling, defying scream, he could feel Ben's cold breath near him. Then, when he opened his eyes, Ben was gone. Instead, Lucas noticed it was his left hand that was clutching his right arm. Even in the dim firelight, he could see a bruise forming on his arm from the struggle. Of course, Ben was not here. He was fighting with himself, but it felt so real. Was this part of the trial? Lucas got up from the ground and moved back towards the campfire. His body was shaking from the spike of adrenaline and sweat ran down his face. Grabbing his bottle of soda out of his pack, he took a long drink from the container, nearly finishing it in one go. Eventually, Lucas was able to catch his breath and get his mind back on track. Grabbing a handful of sticks, he carefully placed each one into the glowing pile of burning wood. He had to try and make this his only focus. Keeping the flames going was the only thing that mattered right now. Each moment that passed brought him closer to the finish line. He was beginning to learn the rules of this game. The creatures of the woods avoid the light, but he could still be assaulted by visions. Occasionally he would see Ben just outside the circle waving at him, motioning for him to come forward. Every time he saw him, he turned away and focused on the fire instead. It can't hurt me. It's not here, Lucas said to himself. As long as he did not pay attention to them, they couldn't take control of his mind. a low growl echoed through the woods, causing even the creatures that circled him to stop. It took all of Lucas's willpower to not look away from the campfire, but he could see something massive was coming into the circle. The growl now became more insistent and grew louder with every moment. Finally, being unable to stand it, Lucas looked at the approaching thing from the woods. A giant grizzly bear was staring into him. Its mouth hung open, revealing its many teeth. In that moment, Lucas couldn't concentrate on anything else. A primal fear took control of his thoughts. It can't be real, he thought to himself. It's just a hallucination. A deafening roar shattered his fragile resolve, causing him to run towards the tree line. Lucas dashed away from the animal, knocking over the small fire as he made his escape. He could hear the bear chasing after him, closing the distance. Just as he was about to exit the circle, Lucas was finally able to regain control, stop the flight response that held him hostage for only a few seconds. However, it was a few seconds too long. The creature, seeing an opening, immediately jumped on Lucas, grabbing his arm with talon-like hands. A hot flash of pain gripped him as the claws tore into his arm, making it impossible for him to pull away. Slowly, the creatures dragged him away from the light of the dim fire. He tried to strike at them with his other arm, throwing his fists against them with little focus. However, the blows seemed to only encourage the forest nightmares that held him, causing them to pull even harder on his arm. In his moment of desperation, an idea managed to claw its way up his panic-stricken mind. Pulling his cell phone out of his pocket, Lucas turned on the screen and pointed it towards his attackers. The light was dim, but it caused the attackers to let go of his arm and strike the phone. The cell phone flew out of his hands and into the darkness of the forest. However, it was just enough time for Lucas to retreat back to the campfire. The bear was nowhere in sight, which means it only existed in his mind. Another trick of this endless night. Blood was dripping off his arm and into the soil. He grabbed a spare shirt from his pack and wrapped it around the cuts, attempting to stop the flow. He would most likely need stitches, but that wouldn't be an option until morning. Lucas watched helplessly as the shirt wrapped around his injury turned a dark shade of red. Looking up from his wound, he could tell the forest creatures had gotten closer. The faceless monsters had moved inside the circle now, and appeared to be slowly closing in on their prey. Then the reason hit him like a train. The fire was dying out. He had recklessly knocked over the burning woodpile on his retreat and neglected to tend to it. Instead, he was focused on his wound, which wouldn't be his biggest problem if those things got a hold of him. The thought of what they would do if they got him again made Lucas shudder. The fire had died down to a couple of meager flames. Searching the area for the lighter fluid yielded no results. How could he be so careless? He lost the one thing that made keeping the light source going easy. With no other options, he tried throwing a few smaller twigs to build it back up. Instead of helping, the damp wood put out the flames, making the forest even darker. A muffled moan came from the faceless creatures. Somehow, the sound escaping them, even though they didn't possess a mouth. They began to crawl closer to him, just mere feet from catching their prey. Grabbing a pile of leaves, he threw it on the embers. Lucas was not sure if it would work, but he saw it on a TV show once. He got down near the fire and blew on the embers. The embers glowed hot from the burst of oxygen, but did not catch the leaves. He took in one more deep, long breath and blew on the embers again, this time keeping an even flow of air. The leaves began to smoke and suddenly burst into a roaring flame, just as the many hands began to reach for him. The instant explosion of light caused the creatures to run back to the tree line, to use it as a shield. Not wasting this opportunity, Lucas began to shovel sticks and leaves onto the newly born flame, burning anything and everything that he could find. After a good hour of building back up the fire, he collapsed next to it. He was not sure if it was the stress, lack of sleep, or blood loss, but he was unbelievably exhausted. He no longer had the energy to do anything but periodically add firewood. Without his phone, he was unable to check the time, but he was certain sunrise was near. The visions of this place assaulted him constantly now, somehow aware that the time of the wishing circle was coming to an end. In a last attempt to push him out of the circle, it sent a constant stream of manifestations. If he looked away from the campfire, he would see Ben or some other ghastly nightmare. Animals and monsters alike appeared next to him, shouting or roaring, trying to break him down. Glancing at his feet, he could see multiple snakes wrapped around his legs. However, this time, Lucas had learned his lesson. Rather than engage with them, he just closed his eyes until the vision passed. It felt like an eternity had passed in this state of torture, but soon the visions began to slow in number, like the power of the forest was dissipating with the close of night. The forest creatures began to retreat from the circle, aware of the coming daylight. "You didn't get me," shouted Lucas, feeling some of his strength return to him in this victory. His head snapped to the left as he heard the sound of footsteps approaching the circle. The aging shopkeeper emerged from the tree line and walked slowly towards Lucas. The woman who had originally told him of this place, given him the journal. She had a sinister smirk painted on her face, the kind of expression that was completely unnatural from the kind, caring expressions she had displayed in the herbal shop. One last vision to test my resolve, Lucas thought to himself. He closed his eyes and looked away from the woman. However, the footsteps continued to draw closer to his location. When he opened his eyes, the shopkeeper was right next to him. She brought up a black object and stuck it to his neck. The electrical current of the stun gun caused Lucas's muscles to contract and forced him to the ground. "She is actually here," was the only thought Lucas could summon. Dazed, he attempted to get to his feet, but was hit with another blast from the shopkeeper. This time, she held the device to him, making sure he was completely immobilized. Grabbing both of his legs, the shopkeeper began to drag Lucas away from the fire into the outside of the circle. Although her frame was small, the muscles in her body were strong and lean from a life of physical labor. She could see he was slowly coming back to consciousness, which caused her to pick up the pace. Before he could mount any real resistance, he was dragged into the outer area of the forest. A thin, pale woman appeared from behind one of the trees. She loosely resembled a person, but her height was unnaturally tall, and her arms too long for her body. The forest guardian's hair was intertwined with leaves and sticks, and a large antler hung on her head, like a crown of bone. The shopkeeper dropped to her knees at the appearance of the forest spirit. Holding out her hands, she began to plead.
"Noble guardian of the forest, daughter of Tapio, I offer you this sacrifice, a gift in exchange for your blessing. I wish to be young once more and add more days to my stream. I will guide many a people to your eternal harvest,"
said the shopkeeper. "I accept this gift. Burden of age I shall lift. Go forth and guide others to this course," replied the forest spirit. Finally pulling himself out of the daze, Lucas attempted to get up from the forest floor. However, it was impossible for him to move. Looking down at his body, he could see that thick roots trapped him to the ground. He strained with all of his strength he had left, but the roots did not budge. In fact, they grew tighter around his chest, restricting his ability to take in a deep breath. The shopkeeper's youth returned before his very eyes. Her once gray hair turned black. Stepping over Lucas, the shopkeeper turned back to lock eyes with him one final time.
"Thank you for your sacrifice. Don't worry, it will be over quickly."
Then she disappeared from sight, with only the retreating sound of her footsteps as any token of the disturbance. "It's not fair," cried Lucas. The thin forest spirit looked at Lucas with a puzzled expression and an odd smile across her long face, like Lucas had just told a deeply funny story. "Did I not warn you? Others may come before the night is at its end. The deal was made, and now you seek an appeal? Fret not, for you are about to resolve your debt. Let the harvest begin, and put this trial to an end." The forest spirit bent down over Lucas and extended her long arms towards his face. The last thing he saw was her thin fingers reaching for his eyes. Only the sound of Lucas's screaming pleas greeted the morning rays of the forest. Hey guys, Ghastly here. If you're at the end of the video, I can only assume you like the content. I want to thank you for your support over the last month. I have really enjoyed reading the comments and try to reply to all of them. I don't always know what to say, but I want you to know that I appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for new stories. I'm working on writing more content now, so let me know in the comments the kind of stories you enjoy. Until next time.